Rebooting always makes the difference. Okay, after these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now, none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, there are really 2 stories intertwined in today's reading. One has to do with fish, and the other has to do with sheep. So let's take a look at the fish story first. New Testament experts often point out that one way you can tell these resurrection stories are true is that they don't always show the disciples in the best light. If the disciples of Jesus had made up the story to convince others, they surely would have given themselves a better role to play. They would have made themselves out to be heroes of the faith. They would have given a better response to the news that Jesus was risen from the dead. Their own part in the story would have been more flattering. Instead, we read about their disbelief, their failure to accept the women's eyewitness account as anything more than an idle tale. And we see them spending an entire night fishing for nothing. Zilch. Nada. And some of these disciples were expert fishermen. They were pros. This is what they had been doing for a living when they first met Jesus. Even so, after a long night of casting their net, they'd come up empty. And now it was morning. The sun wasn't quite up yet, but the gray light of early dawn showed them that there was a charcoal fire on the shore. And even though they'd caught no fish, they could smell that someone was cooking fish up there on the rocks. They aren't far from shore, and the person at the fire calls out to them, "Children, you haven't caught anything, have you?" "No," they answer. "Well, try throwing your net off the other side of the boat." They think it's crazy, but they do it. And suddenly the net is full of fish, large fish, 153 different large fish. This sounds a lot like a story in another gospel. Back in Luke 5, at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, Jesus climbs into Simon's boat to get away from the crowds that are pressing in on him, and he tells Simon to go out into the deep water and cast his net. And Jesus tells Simon, "You can do this." Simon says, "Okay, if you say so, but we've been fishing all night and we haven't caught anything." Hear the parallel? According to Luke, when the nets come up full to bursting, Simon falls on his knees and confesses his own sinfulness and Jesus as his Lord. And Jesus says, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch people instead of fish." But this time, on this post-resurrection fishing trip, John tells us the disciple whom Jesus loved, and we take that to be John himself, is the one who first recognizes the figure on the beach. Kind of like the disciple whom Jesus loved was the first one to arrive at the empty tomb when they came running after the women had told them it was empty. As the boat gets closer to the rocky shoreline, John tells Peter, "Hey, it's the Lord." And the first thing Peter does is throw on some clothes and throw himself into the water. He swims up to the rocks that line the lake, and he climbs up them to get to Jesus. The others bring in the boat with the net full of fish trailing behind. Jesus says, "Bring some of the fish you've caught," and Peter jumps back into the water to haul in the catch, single-handedly. Then they all sit down to breakfast. Grilled fish and broken bread. It's the closest thing John's gospel ever gets to describing the Lord's Supper. Instead of a last meal before his crucifixion, John has Jesus offer a post-resurrection breakfast. Now, there are two little details that we need to make sure we notice. First, Jesus doesn't need their fish. He's already cooking while their nets are still empty. But when they follow his commands, he invites them to add their fish to the food he has already prepared. Jesus uses our God-given talents and adds them to the work that he's already doing in our lives. He invites us to share in a feast that he has prepared, but he uses what we bring to the table. Second, when the expert fishermen have come up empty using their own methods, Jesus gives them a simple command to change the way they do things, and they are suddenly blessed with abundance. Now, whole books have been written about the significance of the number 153, 153 fish that fill their net. The most commonly accepted interpretation comes from the 4th century theologian Jerome. He writes that there were, at that time in Galilee, 153 different species of fish known. The net wasn't just filled with 153 fish, Jerome argues, it was filled with 153 different fish. In fact, all the possible species of fish that there were at that time. It symbolizes the extent to which fishing for people will go, to the whole world, to every known person. That's Jerome's take, and most theologians still, even though they go off on different tangents, they still come back to that idea that the number of fish, whether or not 153 is actually significant, it indicates an abundance and a completeness of the spread of the Word of God. Maybe Jerome got it right, maybe not. But one thing is certain, the net was empty all night long as the fishermen tried their tried and true methods. When they followed Jesus' direction to do things differently, the net was full of large fish, and it didn't break. Their capacity to catch fish grew with their obedience. We might learn something from that. After breakfast, Jesus and Peter go for a walk down the beach. They have a short but repetitive conversation. 3 times Jesus asks, "Do you love me?" And 3 times Peter answers, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Each time, Jesus responds with a command to care for his sheep. "Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep," Jesus says. Now, it's very easy for us to see the connection between Peter's earlier 3 denials and these 3 professions of loyalty and devotion. It's also easy to see why Peter is hurt when Jesus asks him a 3rd time, "Do you love me?" "You know everything, Lord. You know that I love you," he insists. What might not be so easy to see is the way Jesus draws Peter into a new relationship through this short conversation. Keep in mind that when Peter was in the high priest's courtyard, he didn't deny the divinity of Jesus or Jesus' claim to be the Messiah. What Peter denied was his own relationship to Jesus. When he is asked twice, "You're one of his disciples, aren't you?" Peter says, "I am not." And when he is challenged a 3rd time, he denies knowing Jesus. Now, as they walk together beside the lake, Jesus not only restores that relationship, but creates a new one between himself and Peter. By the 3rd time he questions, "Simon, son of John," he's asking for more than general compassion or affection. Jesus is asking Peter, "Do you love me like a brother? You claim me as your friend. Can I claim you as my friend?" Peter's distress is almost as important as his words. "You know everything, Lord. You know I love you. You know all my failings and my weaknesses. You know my sin. And if you still want me as your friend, I want to be that friend to you." "Feed my sheep," Jesus tells him. Now, up to this point, Jesus has portrayed himself as the Good Shepherd. Now he entrusts the care of his flock to Peter. It isn't that sheep have replaced fish in importance, but shepherding has been added to fishing. Jesus ends the conversation the same way he began his relationship with Simon and those other fishermen way back at the start of his ministry. He says 2 words, "Follow me." Follow me is what Jesus calls to us now. Follow me whether you're fishing or herding sheep. Follow me when he asks us to change the way we've always done things so that he can bless us with abundance. Follow me as he prepares a feast for us that combines what he provides with what we offer of ourselves. Follow me into such a close friendship, such a deep love, that all can be forgiven and all can be made whole. Jesus calls. Will you follow?